The gate groaned like it recognized me, but the laughter on my porch belonged to strangers. Salt air hit the back of my throat like a swallowed shout, and for a second I thought I'd come to the wrong address, until my name glinted on the mailbox I'd painted 26 summers ago. I gripped the rusted latch, and the metal bit into my palm like a reprimand. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. Cape May, New Jersey, Sunday, June 8th, 2025. The kind of early summer afternoon that makes the sand look sugar white. My wife loved this light. She came down 4 times a year, even when I got busy being indispensable to a city bus depot in Philadelphia. After her funeral on May 3rd, my kids told me, "Sell that useless place, Dad." I said I would. I lied to myself first. The yard used to be dune grass and stubborn lilies. Now, a chalkboard sign leaned against the porch rail in tidy cursive. Salt and Cedar, check-in 3 p.m. A couple in matching linen came out my front door with beach tags around their necks, clutching a woven basket of mini shampoo. "Thanks again!" The woman smiled at me, a stranger on my own path. The man pressed a rolled towel to his shoulder like a spa brochure. They trotted down my steps and past me with the confidence of frequent flyers. A key fob with a little cedar charm swung from the woman's fingers. Inside smelled like lemon cleaner and somebody else's perfume. Hotel white towels were rolled into tight pastries on the coffee table. On the mantel, the seashell frame that held our wedding photo had been turned sideways to show only the ocean behind us. A small black eye watched me from the corner. A nest. "Camera, it's red dot, a lie detector test I hadn't agreed to take." The bass hummed, recording a stranger walking through his own house. My bronze keyring, dented, familiar, clicked against something new, a sleek, smart lock hub wired into the jamb. I ran my thumb over it. The letters looked like the dash of a car I never learned to drive. In the kitchen, the refrigerator held a calendar printed with turnovers. A curling receipt was magneted beneath a smiling crab. Coastal cleaners, turnover, 180, 6, 7, and 25. I didn't need anyone to explain what a turnover was. On the counter, under a sea salt votive, lay a florist bill that didn't belong in a beach house. $2,800. My address at the top, dated 2 weeks after the funeral. Peonies, eucalyptus garland, 20 centerpieces. I could hear my wife's voice teasing. For who exactly, I called my daughter. She picked up on the second ring, all helium and project management. "Dad, are you down there? Great. We should talk strategy." "Strategy," my voice scraped. "There's a chalkboard sign out front." "Branding," she said. "Look, this place was sitting. We helped it help itself. Summer's already booked. It's revenue while we consider buyers." I ended the call, and my phone vibrated so quickly it felt hot. My son texting a link to a broker's listing titled Prime Teardown Opportunity. Next text, "No pressure, just options." Down the hall, the bathroom tile shone wrong like a smile too white. Fresh paint covered old caulk, but didn't hide the smell of damp wood. At the ceiling's edge, an attic pull hung with a thin ribbon, blue, the exact shade of the hair tie my wife kept on her wrist. I tugged it just enough to hear the ladder creak, then let it be. I went back outside as another pair of guests clinked stemless glasses on my porch. I reached for the gate and felt the stub of a padlock I'd cut years ago when the latch froze. The shank, jagged and dull, still sat on the post cap where I'd left it. I pocketed the metal, a cold crescent of the past, and stared at my house. The one my wife visited in seasons, the one I hadn't touched in decades, now paying for someone else's life at $450 a night. It wasn't just a betrayal of money, it was theft of silence. And silence was all I'd come here to spend. I didn't sleep at the cottage. Pride said I could, but the house didn't feel like mine. It felt like a stage set with my name erased in pencil. I walked back to the bus. stop, and checked into a $79 roadside motel off the Garden State Parkway, room 214, ice machine screaming through the drywall like a train no one warned you about. The bedspread was sandy with old sunscreen. The air conditioner rattled like loose. Teeth and breathed a smell I could only describe as past summers. At 6:12 a.m., Monday, June 9th, 2025, the motel alarm I didn't set went off with a brassy electronic bird. I shut it with the butt of my fist and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my shoes. They looked like they'd walked into the wrong decade. The ocean was 3 blocks away, and I could hear it in the vents, that steady pull and return, like a thought you don't want but can't stop having. I made motel coffee with water that never boiled, and wrote numbers on the back of the check-in envelope, $450 a night, x 6 nights, $2,700 a week. If July was fully booked, like my daughter said, my hand paused, more money in a month than my wife and I sometimes saved in a year. My pen dug a groove through the paper like I could carve the math down to something gentle. I folded the envelope twice and slid it into my wallet, next to a bus pass that still had her picture taped to it from the day I said, "Smile for luck." Out on the boardwalk, the light was too good for how I felt. A gull eyed my stale donut, and then the bag with my wife's folded sweater I'd brought, without admitting I'd brought it. The sweater was navy, pilled at the cuff where she twisted it when she thought. I bought a cheap spiral notebook at a souvenir place with keychains shaped like lighthouses. The cashier told me to have a blessed Monday. I nodded like I knew. How'd I walk to the cottage slow, at the corner of Pittsburgh Avenue and the strip of sand that always collected beer caps. The dune grass hissed like it was tired of secrets. My hands shook on the gate, not from age, though I've earned that, but from the kind of anger you can't use. The porch was empty at 8:10. The chalkboard sign still promised check-in 3 p.m. I breathed shallow and knocked on the neighbors. Your Mrs. Carp answered in a mint green robe and tidy slippers, hair pinned as if she were expecting someone better than me. "Oh," she said, and her face changed to the face people make at funerals when they see the person who's lost the most. "Come in, Mr. Hill." It took me a second to remember I was Mr. Hill. Her kitchen smelled like cinnamon toast. On the table lay a small, battered pocket calendar with a kitten on the cover and, God bless neat people, pencil lines that could hold a bridge. "Your wife kept this place alive," she said. "She'd stop at my stoop with a carton of milk because she never liked to arrive empty-handed." She tapped the calendar. "You want to know about that noise complaint?" She didn't wait for me to say yes. She flipped to May and June, tapping dates. May 24th, June 1st, June 7th. "Arrivals," she said. "Sometimes they didn't arrive until near midnight. License plates." She turned the book and I saw tiny notations. PA, NJ, 1NY with a heart. "I am not a snoop," she added. "I am a widow who likes to sleep. Your wife was kind to me. I pay attention when kindness goes missing." I swallowed, because kindness had been the entire economy of that house. "Did you ever meet the owners?" I asked, and the word owners felt like a fishbone. The cleaning girl said the owners were the kids. That's what she said with the quotes, like the kids was a brand. She made the quotes in the air with fingers that had sorted a lot of laundry and probably caught a lot of falling glasses. A pretty girl with navy on her fingers, like she'd been stamping something. I saw the forged consent form in my head, the way the signature leaned left. My wife's signature slanted right, stubborn as a bowline knot. The smell of lemon cleaner came back to me like a slap. I asked if I could take a photograph of her calendar, and she said yes, as if she'd been waiting to be asked. I held my flip phone over the page, my hands steadying as the little shutter sound clicked. Concrete, verifiable, a thing you could place on a desk without shame. Back in my cottage, I stood in the kitchen that wasn't mine and opened the junk drawer. My wife used to keep rubber bands and twist ties there, the good ones she rescued from bread bags. There were new drawer organizers now, plastic and white, but in the back I found something she would have smuggled into any century, a postcard, the glossy type, written in her tight nurse's handwriting. April 12th, 2025. A watercolor gull with a stern look. On the back, gulls are bossy as ever. Attic sticks, bring oil next time. L. I held the card to my face like it might still smell like the peppermint gum she chewed. Next time, I said out loud to a house that wasn't listening. At noon, I called my son. He sent a thumbs-up emoji I could feel landing like a shrug. Then a second message. Can't talk, Demo RN. Proud of you for getting down there. Proud, like I'd made varsity grief. My daughter left a voice note at 12:07, the time stamped on my screen like a receipt. Dad, we've already got July fully booked. Please don't overthink this. It's better for everyone if the place pays for itself until we decide. Decide. The way young people put soft words on hard intentions. I sat on the bottom step and pressed my fingers to the attic cord. A whisper of blue ribbon brushed my knuckles. I thought of the last time my wife and I fought, if you could call it that. She wanted me to come down for Labor Day 2 years ago. I told her I couldn't. She said, you can't or you won't. I said both. She said, one day you'll wish you had a place that remembers you by more than your absence. I said, something about overtime that would embarrass me to repeat. She kissed my cheek and went alone, and the house remembered her. I didn't pull the cord. Not yet. Any move I made had to be the kind of move that didn't need a second draft. If I raged, they'd call me erratic. If I tore down the chalkboard, they'd frame it as sabotage. If I removed the nest and threw it in the ocean, they'd post a clip with a caption about elder stubbornness and go viral. I had to be dull about this. Dull like a ledger, dull like a lockbox key. Dull wins courtrooms. So I opened the cheap spiral notebook and wrote 3 words on the first page, big as a prayer: document, freeze, notify. Under that, I wrote dates: May 3rd, funeral; June 8th, arrival; June 9th, calendar photos. Then I started a list called Proof I Can Hold in a Hand, Deed 1999, Tax Bill 2024, Neighbor's Pocket Calendar, June, photographed. Chalkboard sign, Salt and Cedar, check-in 3 p.m, written exactly that way. Receipt on fridge. Coastal Cleaners, $186,725. Florist bill, $2,800, dated 2 weeks after funeral. Nest cam present, red light, bass humming. Smart lock hub installed, brand model TBD. My handwriting grew calmer as the list grew longer. I walked the rooms once more at 2:40 p.m, the hour you can feel the day tip into whatever it's going to be. On the mantel, the seashell frame still showed a sliver of blue where our faces should have been. I turned it back just enough to see us, younger and private. I whispered, I'm sorry, and meant it for every summer I let the city talk me out of a train ticket. Then I set the frame as it was, because moving it would be an argument I wasn't ready to have. On my way out, I picked up the florist bill, folded it twice, and slid it into the notebook's back pocket like a talisman. The porch boards creaked under my weight, a sound I knew better than my own blood pressure. I pulled the gate closed and felt the empty space where the padlock had been, the shank in my pocket pressed against my thigh, a crescent moon of a decision. I hadn't made yet. I didn't have a plan, not really. What I had was a choice, paper or shouting. I'd done my share of shouting in garages and depots and at TV remotes that never listened. Paper, I decided, because paper has a memory, and memory is what they'd tried to rent out from under me. I walked back toward the parkway, holding the notebook like a passport, and promised the house I'd come back with someone who spoke paper better than I did. Someone who would make the math tell the truth. The next morning, June 11th, the air in Cape May felt thick enough to chew. I woke before sunrise at the motel and stared at the cheap blinds glowing orange. I'd slept maybe 3 hours. My wife used to say, "When you can't sleep, make lists." So I did. A page for questions. Who's getting the money? Whose name's on the permits? What's the platform? Another page for proof I still needed. By 8, I was standing in front of City Hall, a squat brick building with flags that snapped in the wind like they were impatient. I didn't make an appointment. I didn't need one. Old men with folders don't get turned away. They just get pitied. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed like bees. I told the clerk at the code desk my name, my address, and that I wanted to check any permits filed in the last year for my property on Dune Road. She typed with 2 fingers, looked at the screen, then called over Officer Diaz. He was my age, but moved younger, sharp-creased shirt, the kind of man who respected clean paperwork. "You said Dune Road?" he asked, flipping through a drawer. He pulled out 2 noise citations and a permit packet with my wife's name typed at the top. "Owner consent form, March 2nd, 2025, he said, reading aloud. "That's about a month before." He stopped, realizing what came next. "Yes," I said. Before she passed, he hesitated, then slid the papers across the counter. "You want copies?" I nodded. The signature on the form leaned left against her habit. My wife's handwriting always tilted right, stubborn as a weed growing toward the sun. This one leaned like it was tired of pretending. Diaz squinted. "You know, that's odd. The left-hand slant means a different pen angle, usually someone else's writing." He lowered his voice. "Want me to pull the full packet?" "Please." He came back with a stack, permit approvals, emails from something called Salt and Cedar Stays LLC, and 2 citations for loud music. My wife's name on both, as owner on record. I thanked him, paid the $2 copy fee, and tucked everything into a manila envelope I'd labeled Evidence 1. When I stepped back into the sun, it felt heavier than when I'd gone in. Next. Stop. The bank branch on Lafayette Street. A young clerk in a blue scarf clicked at her terminal. "Payouts for home-sharing platforms typically route to an LLC, she said, rehearsed and polite. "Do you know the entity?" "No," I said, "but I'm about to." She printed a note with routing numbers tied to an account under Salt. "And Cedar Stays, LLC, registered at a Philadelphia address. My son's neighborhood. I asked for a copy of the bank's verification policy, signed and dated." She hesitated, but gave it. "People trust grief. They think it makes you harmless." That night I called Mr. Rizzo, the estate attorney, who'd drawn up our will back in 1999. I still had his number in my wallet. He remembered my wife by name. "You still in Philadelphia?" he asked. "Mostly," I said. "But the house isn't." He chuckled softly, then caught my tone. "Come in tomorrow. Bring whatever they've been touching." His office hadn't changed since the Clinton years. Dark wood, dusty law books, a grandfather clock that breathed every quarter hour. I placed the deed, the 1999 will, the funeral program, and the city papers on his desk. He read in silence for 10 minutes. Then, in that calm voice lawyers use before bad news, he said, "Your children don't have legal authority to operate the property. The estate is still in probate. No letters of administration were ever issued to them. So, what does that mean, plain English?" He capped his pen. "It means they had no right to rent your house. None. Everything they've done is a liability, attached to your wife's name, and therefore yours. We'll need to act before those liabilities become liens." I nodded slowly. I felt my wife's ghost exhale somewhere behind me. Back at the cottage that evening, the porch still smelled like sunscreen and citronella. I waited until the last guest car pulled away, then went inside. I unscrewed the smart lock carefully, placed it in a zip bag, and wrote the date on masking tape, June 11th, 2025. The Nest camera blinked once as I pulled its power cord. I slipped out the micro SD card and sealed it in an envelope marked Recording March to June. When I brought the envelope next door, Mrs. Carp poured me chamomile tea. Her kitchen light hummed like the City Hall fluorescence. "I saw your daughter here the day movers brought furniture," she said softly. She had ink on her hands, navy, like she'd been stamping things. Told me they were rebranding. She frowned. I didn't know grief had a brand. I smiled, just a little. Neither did I. That night back at the motel, I opened my notebook again and drew 3 columns. In hand, to get, next step. Under, in hand, I listed deed, tax bill, noise citations, permit copy, consent form, smart. Loch Ness card, neighbor log, under to get, platform screenshots, LLC registration, booking payouts, HOA notice, and whatever was inside the attic, my wife's blue ribbon secret. Under next step, file city complaint, file injunction, demand accounting. I underlined the word accounting, because that's what this was, an audit of love, of silence, of whatever part of me still wanted to believe my kids didn't mean harm. But intent doesn't balance ledgers. Before sleeping, I flipped the page and wrote, "Revenge begins with a stapler." It wasn't poetry. It was a plan. By midnight, I had my list of first moves taped to the motel lamp, screenshot every post, every photo, every review. Confirm bank trail for Salt and Cedar Stays LLC. Meet Rizzo again with evidence. Keep my anger quiet. Don't open the attic. Not yet. I turned off the lamp and listened to the highway murmur like distant surf. I used to believe justice was loud, a hammer, a verdict, a cheer. But that night I realized real justice starts in silence, under bad lighting, with a man writing, alone in a motel room, stapler on the nightstand like a weapon he actually knows how to use. By June 22nd, I'd stopped trembling. Anger had cooled into arithmetic, columns, receipts, checkmarks. I wasn't a man grieving anymore. I was a man reconciling a ledger that didn't balance. That Sunday morning, I opened my laptop at the motel and typed Salt and Cedar Cape May into the rental platform search bar. There it was, the cottage, my cottage, under my wife's name, with her favorite quote in the description. The tide teaches patience. My kids hadn't even bothered to change that. The listing bragged, owner-approved legacy cottage since 1999, 5-star reviews, managed by Salt and Cedar Stays. I clicked through the gallery. They'd staged it like a boutique AD. My wife's quilt folded at the end of the bed. Her ceramic bowls stacked with lemons, our seashell frame turned sideways so our faces didn't show. Just the blue behind us. I scrolled to the booking calendar, solid blue through July. $450. A night, minimum 3 nights. I printed everything, screenshots, payout policies, calendar cancellation rules, and the Friday deposit cycle showing funds routed to an LLC bank account. Proof of income, proof of ownership misused. I stapled them in order and labeled the stack Exhibit 1, the sale of my grief. At noon, I met Rizzo in his office again. His tie looked like it had seen more depositions than weddings. "This is more than a family dispute," he said, flipping through my printouts. "They're operating a commercial entity off your estate. That's unjust enrichment and potential fraud." He called his paralegal, a sharp woman named Maria, and handed her my pages. She traced the routing information with a highlighter, cross-referencing it against a public record database. 10 minutes later, she looked up and said, "The LLC address is a loft apartment in Fishtown, Philadelphia. Registered August 4th, 2024, by one Evan Hill." My son, I stared at the date. August, 9 months before my wife died. He'd been planning this while she was still dusting the porch rail. Rizzo leaned back. "We'll need a court to compel the bank records, but first we'll show cause. Misrepresentation, unauthorized operation, and unfiled occupancy tax. You have enough for an injunction." "Then file it," I said. He nodded. "Before we do, you should also file a city complaint in Cape May. It'll freeze their permit." So I did. Officer Diaz emailed me later that day. His subject line, "Read your property. Permit packet." Attached was the whole application the kids had submitted. My wife's signature wasn't the only lie. In the margin of one page was a tiny doodle, a wavy line shaped like a tide. My daughter had drawn that flourish on every invitation and event contract she ever sent. She used to joke it was her brand, the same brand now inked onto a forged consent form. That night I found her Instagram reel dated March 2nd. The same day the document was signed. She was stamping wedding invites at her office, her thumb and index finger smeared with navy ink. The timestamp and ink color matched the consent form exactly. I printed both images side by side, drew a line between them, and wrote in the margin, "Left-handed lie." The next day, I drove to the HOA office at Cape Meadows. A young woman behind the desk looked tired of tourists. I told her I was the owner of the Dune Road property. She blinked, then rifled through a file drawer. "You might want this," she said, handing me an envelope stamped "Final Notice." Inside was a letter addressed to my wife, dated May 20th, 2025, warning of $3,200 in fines for unauthorized short-term rentals. It had been returned to sender June 1st. My wife had already been gone nearly a month. I kept the envelope, the return label still attached, and added it to the manila folder. Another quiet nail in the coffin they'd built out of greed. Back at the motel, I sat on the bed with my notebook and began mapping money flows. $128,400 gross bookings, 12 months. Platform 15% fee, $19,260. Remaining $109,140. Transfers to Salt and Cedar LLC, Filler Act, $18,000. Visa payoff, Evans debt, $14,750 renovation charge, Coastal Fixers LLC, $9,600 unremitted occupancy tax, $3,200 HOA fines, $2,800 florist Billy drew arrows until the page looked like an anatomy chart of deceit. Then I underlined one phrase 3 times, operating under a dead woman's name. By July 2nd, Rizzo had drafted the verified complaint. Count 1, conversion of estate property. Count 2, unjust enrichment. Count 3, accounting and restitution. Count 4, injunctive relief. We attached everything, my photos, the forged signature, Diaz's permit copies, HOA fines, the florist bill, and screenshots of the LLC's registration. We didn't label them Exhibit A or B. We labeled them with what they were: my wife's signature, forged, the florist bill, neighbor's calendar, smart lock removed. June 11th. The filing clerk stamped the papers July 2nd, 2025, 11:42 a.m. When I heard the thunk of that stamp, it sounded like a heartbeat returning to rhythm. The next morning, Rizzo called. "We got it." The judge granted a temporary restraining order, no rentals until further notice. At noon, I drove back to the cottage. For the first time in a year, the porch was empty. The Salt and Cedar sign was gone, only faint chalk. Dust remained on the board, half erased by sea wind. Inside, the Nest camera blinked dark, unplugged, harmless. I stood in the living room and listened to the quiet breathe again. The boards under my feet creaked like they were stretching after. A long sleep. I didn't smile. I just exhaled. It wasn't victory, not yet. But the first checkmark in my notebook finally had a date beside it, July 3rd. Porch quiet. Rentals frozen. The house didn't feel stolen anymore. It felt like a witness that had finally agreed to testify. The 4th of July came in with fireworks. And fury. Not from the sky, though those were loud enough, but from my children. Silence had never frightened them before. Now it did. The restraining order landed like a thunderclap. At 9:13 a.m., my phone started buzzing, one notification after another. Evan. Dad, what the hell? We just lost July's bookings. Lena. This isn't how Mom would have wanted it. You're making this ugly. Evan again. You could have just called us first. Then, a final message that read like a punchline. You're going to tank your own inheritance if you push this. Inheritance. The word tasted wrong in my mouth, like they'd already buried me next to her and started counting. I didn't respond. Instead, I sat at the motel desk, watching the fireworks pop from a window that rattled with every boom. Outside, people were laughing, grilling, kissing. Inside, I was writing down their words like evidence in a deposition. I'd learned something in the last few weeks. Silence isn't empty, it's leverage. 2 days later, the doorbell camera I'd unplugged was gone. Someone had entered the cottage. I drove down from the motel and found the cease use notice officer. Diaz had posted fluttering on the porch rail like a wounded flag. It was half-torn, bootprints in the sand below it. My pulse climbed. Inside, furniture had been rearranged, the Airbnb staging boxes stacked by the wall, the floral runners folded. Someone had come to clean up. At 11:05 a.m., my daughter's SUV pulled into the driveway. Sunglasses, pressed linen dress, a practiced calm. She got out holding an iced coffee like a prop in a commercial. "Dad," she started, that practiced, syrupy tone. "We could have avoided this if you'd just talked to us first." "Talk to you," I said. "Lena, I found guests in my living room. You turned our house into a revolving door." She sighed dramatically, brushing invisible lint off her sleeve. "We were just keeping it from rotting. The income covered taxes, maintenance, everything. You don't even come down here." I pulled a file from my satchel and slid the 1999 deed across the kitchen counter. "Taxes are paid, maintenance handled, by me, always have been. And this deed still says my name." She looked away, jaw tight. "You're being emotional." I pointed at the $2,800 florist bill I'd pulled from the drawer and laid it beside the deed. "This was charged after your mother's funeral. Flowers for your launch party?" That broke her composure. "That was for marketing," she said, voice rising. "We were building something. Mom would have filed her taxes," I interrupted, "and she'd have told you that branding doesn't excuse forgery." The silence between us snapped tight as wire. Then she reached for the nest base on the mantel, found it empty, and went still. "Where's the SD card?" "Safe," I said, "where you can't edit it." Her jaw trembled. She muttered something about Dad's losing it, and swept past me. Outside, she slammed her door hard enough to shake the porch. I waited until the dust settled, then sat down on the bottom stair. Mrs. Karp was watching from her porch, watering can in hand. She didn't wave, but her eyes said she'd seen everything. Maybe she'd write it down in that pocket calendar of hers. I hoped she would. At sunset, the fireworks started again, red reflections flashing against the cottage windows. Diaz came by just after dark to repost the cease-use notice, this time with his signature at the bottom. "People think old houses keep secrets," he said, nailing it to the post, "but it's always people." That night, after the noise died, I stood in the kitchen and looked up at the attic cord. The blue ribbon swayed slightly in the draft, my wife's touch frozen in time. I reached up, pulled gently, and the ladder creaked down like a sigh. The air smelled of cedar and dust, our kind of quiet. Up there, under a tarp, sat a small cedar, box tied with the same blue ribbon. My hands shook as I untied it. Inside, letters, bills, receipts, and one envelope addressed in her handwriting. "To my husband. Open only when you're ready." I sat cross-legged under the low beam and opened it carefully. The paper smelled faintly of lavender. April 18th, 2025. If you're reading this, it means the tide has done what tides do. Pulled one of us away. I kept the cottage because it's the only place where silence still feels like prayer. If the children treat it like a cash drawer, Rizzo has another envelope that explains everything. Use it if you must. But promise me, don't let bitterness be the landlord of your heart. Her words hit harder than any courtroom verdict ever could. I pressed the page to my chest and stayed like that until dawn painted the floorboards pale gold. Before leaving, I circled a word in my ledger. Motive. Not mine, theirs. My wife's warning became my direction. I wasn't going to fight them like enemies. I was going to expose them like math. By morning, the plan was clear. Rizzo would move forward with the injunction. Diaz would monitor compliance. I'd prepare every page, every signature, every false smile for the September 19th hearing. And somewhere between the rust of the gate and the weight of her letter, I realized something simple. Revenge wasn't the opposite of grief. It was just grief with proof. By August, Cape May had that wet heat feeling where the air itself seems to argue with you. The boardwalk crowds thinned out during the week, but my days were packed tighter than any summer weekend. Every morning, I met Rizzo in his office, sorting through statements, subpoenas, and the thin kind of evidence that only looks small until a judge sees it. On August 14th, the depositions began. Rizzo's conference room was all dark wood and still air, blinds half drawn. The court reporter sat like a statue, her keyboard clicking like hail on a tin roof. Across the table, my children looked like actors playing innocent. Evan wore a too-tight suit, and Lena's blouse was so white it glared. Their realtor sat between them like a referee, clutching a briefcase full of denials. Rizzo opened quietly. For the record, this is deposition in Hill vs. Salt and Cedar Stays LLC concerning conversion of estate property. He looked at my son. Mr. Hill, can you tell us when the LLC was formed? Evan cleared his throat. Last summer, Mom said she wanted the property to be useful. Last summer, meaning August 4th, 2024, Rizzo pressed. 9 months before her death? Yes. And was she aware it was a for-profit business registered under your name? Evan hesitated. We discussed possibilities. I leaned forward. She didn't sign any of those papers, did she? He blinked, throat tight. She trusted us. Trust. That word again, the one people use when they've run out of honesty. Then it was Lena's turn. She slid a contractor invoice across. The table, $14,750 for a bath refresh. Signed in my wife's name, dated May 10th, 1 week after her funeral. My stomach went hollow. Rizzo didn't raise his voice. He just took out a copy of the death certificate, placed it beside the invoice, and said, "That must have been quite the miracle renovation." The room went quiet. The court reporter's keys paused mid-air. Lena's eyes glistened, but not with remorse, just embarrassment. You didn't mean to get caught," I said. Before she could answer, Rizzo's phone buzzed. He read the screen, his brow furrowing. "Interesting," he murmured, turning it toward me. "The rental platform just responded to our legal notice." I took the phone. The email subject line read, "Compliance Inquiry, Property ID 32477. The platform had frozen the listing pending investigation. Attached were payout summaries and a guest ledger titled Family Comp Rate. Each line listed a discount, some labeled cash on site. 2 usernames stood out, Lena Events and Evan Sales. They'd been pocketing cash bookings off the books while claiming it was Mom's dream. Rizzo looked at them with something close to pity. "You didn't just steal from family," he said. "You committed tax fraud in your mother's name." I didn't gloat. I just felt tired, like the tide after a storm, spent, but still moving. That night, I drove to the cottage. The air was heavy with humidity and secrets. I climbed the attic. Ladder again, flashlight trembling in my hand. The cedar smell was stronger up there, cleaner, like she'd been here recently. I knelt beside the box I'd opened weeks before. Under the cedar lining, something shifted, an envelope I hadn't noticed. Inside was a photo, my wife in April, dusting the mantel, sunlight catching her hair. Behind the photo was a folded page in her handwriting. It wasn't a new will, just a note in the margin of an old one, copied for her records. "House is his peace. If they turn it to hustle, let court teach them tide tables. I laughed once, quiet and sharp. Of course she'd known. She always did. She'd watched me chase extra shifts instead of sunsets. She'd known they'd chase shortcuts instead of patience. I drove back to Philadelphia that night, her letter in my pocket. The highway lights blurred through the windshield, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel lost. I felt instructed. Over the next few weeks, Rizzo built the final case, brick by brick. Diaz confirmed in writing that the owner consent form was forged and that permit 2025-1039 was revoked. The HOA sent me updated fines and a clean ledger of $200 satisfied in full after the injunction. The platform forwarded guest communications and payout logs totaling $128,400 in unreported revenue. Each number was a confession in its own handwriting. When September came, I had everything labeled in neat folders. Deed, invoices, permit, platform records, death certificate, florist bill, letter. Each tab a truth waiting to breathe. The twist wasn't just that they'd been caught. It was that my wife had already built the map for me to find them. Her handwriting had become the compass of my revenge. On September 18th, the night before, the hearing, I sat on the porch of the cottage. The wind had shifted, cooler, clearer. For the first time since she died, I didn't feel like a trespasser in my own life. I was ready. The next morning, when I walked into the courthouse carrying that shoebox of evidence, I wasn't nervous. I was calm, because this wasn't about anger anymore. It was about balance. People think revenge is about rage, but the truth is simpler. It's just arithmetic, done slowly by someone who still remembers what every number used to mean. September 19, 2025. The Cape May courthouse sat 2 blocks from the ocean, a grey box of bureaucracy that smelled faintly of salt, paper, and lemon floor wax. I got there an hour early. Old habits. I'd worked 30 years in transit. You learn to arrive before the breakdowns do. I carried a shoebox, not a briefcase, not a binder, just an old Reebok box my wife used to store Christmas cards. Inside were the pieces of our story. The cut. Padlock shank, neighbor's calendar, florist bill, smart lock, Nest SD card, and my wife's letter sealed in a sandwich bag. Every item had a date written on masking tape, because justice, I'd learned, depends on dates. Rizzo met me on the steps, tie caught in the wind. "You ready?" he asked. "Been ready since June." We walked inside. The courtroom was small. Fluorescent lights, water stains on ceiling tiles, the kind of place where you don't expect anything permanent to happen, yet lives get rewritten there. My children were already seated. Lena's white blouse had been replaced with navy silk. Evan wore the same suit from the deposition, this time with a different tie, as if that could change the math. Between them sat their realtor, face pale. When the clerk called our case, Hill versus Salton Cedar Stays, LLC, my name sounded foreign. But the moment the judge looked over his reading glasses and said, "Mr. Hill," I felt the years of quiet come back like oxygen. Rizzo began like he always did, calm and exact. "Your Honor, the estate of Mrs. Hill remains in probate. No authority was granted to the defendants to operate or profit from the property. What began as a sentimental home became, without consent, a commercial business grossing over $128,000 under a deceased woman's name." He placed the first document on the evidence table, the owner consent form, with my wife's left-leaning forged signature. Then the Instagram post. Lena, March 2nd, same day, navy ink on her fingers. Then the HOA fine letter, stamped May 20th, returned unopened. Each page made a sound like a heartbeat when it hit the wood. Diaz testified next. He stood straight, uniform, crisp. The permit application was submitted March 3rd, 2025. I reviewed it myself. Signature didn't match prior city files, but given the volume of applications, we processed it. Upon later inspection, I confirmed the inconsistency. He pointed to the line on the page. "This slant here, left, Mrs. Hill's authentic. Signature leaned right. For me, that was enough to void the permit. Rizzo nodded. And the operator of record? Sultan Cedar Stays, LLC. Registered to the defendant, Evan Hill. Evan's lawyer cleared his throat. My client acted in good faith, under the assumption his mother wished to generate income from the property. Diaz cut him off. Then your client should have filed taxes. None were paid. The judge raised a brow. Noted. Then came Mrs. Karp. She walked to the stand holding her pocket calendar like a hymn book. The courtroom hushed when she flipped the kitten-covered cover and read her notes aloud. May 24th, 11:30 p.m. Loud music, silver car, PA plates. June 1st, 9:10 p.m. Couple with cooler, NJ plates. June 7th, noise until 1 a.m. Rizzo smiled kindly. Mrs. Karp, why did you record all that? She shrugged. Because, Your Honor, I'm a widow who likes to sleep, and I remember who was unkind to me. Her voice cracked on kind. The judge nodded, admitted. Finally, it was my turn. I walked to the table and set the shoebox down gently like an offering. This, I said, is everything they thought no one would notice. I opened it one item at a time. The padlock shank. This is the lock my wife and I used to close the gate each fall, rusted shut last year. They replaced it with a keypad. The florist bill, 2 weeks after my wife's funeral, for an event that never happened. The smart lock, installed June 2024. I removed it June 11th, 2025. The Nest card contains footage of my children greeting paying guests, their voices, not mine. The judge leaned forward slightly. And this letter, I nodded. April 18th, 2025, her handwriting. I opened it, unfolded it carefully. If they turn the house to hustle, let court teach them tide tables. Silence. Even the HVAC seemed to hold its breath. Rizzo took over. He slid a printed chart across the bench, a payout ledger from the rental platform. Your Honor, here are the total deposits, $128,400 gross revenue, all funneled to Sultan Cedar Stays, LLC. $18,000 went to pay the defendant's personal visa balance. $14,150 went to a renovation invoice signed in the decedent's name posthumously. None of this was reported to the IRS nor to the probate court. The judge's pen scratched. And you, Mr. Hill, he said, turning to me. What are you asking for? Not punishment, I said, just an accounting. I don't want them jailed or ruined. I want the truth in writing and the house quiet. He nodded once. Honest answer. Then he looked at my children. You two care to respond? Lena tried first. Dad, we were trying to help. Help yourself, I said softly. The judge held up a hand. I've heard enough. He shuffled the papers for a long minute, the sound like surf on wood. The court finds that the defendants operated the property unlawfully during probate. I hereby grant an injunction. No rentals, no sale, no access without the petitioner's consent. The defendants will provide a full accounting within 30 days and restitution of profits as determined by audit. Additionally, all occupancy, taxes and HOA fines will be the responsibility of Sultan Cedar Stays, LLC. Bang. One gavel strike. It wasn't loud, but it was final. When we stepped outside, the September sun was low, gold against the courthouse glass. The ocean smelled clean. Evan tried to speak first. Dad, I raised a hand. You had your say. Lena's voice broke. We didn't think. That, I said, is the problem. You never thought, you planned. There's a difference. Rizzo walked beside me down the courthouse steps. You got what you came for, he said. No, I said, I got what she wanted. Behind us, the realtor was already on his phone, cancelling listings, the sound of panic mixing with the seagulls. I didn't turn back. When I reached the parking lot, I looked at the shoebox in my hands. Inside it, the smart lock's metal face caught the sunlight like an apology. The courthouse doors shut behind us, and the sound echoed like the sea pulling back. Fallout isn't fireworks. It's the quiet after truth, the kind that leaves you standing still, unsure whether to feel proud or broken. I chose both. October arrived with a crispness that felt earned. The summer stink of sunscreen and excuses had finally blown out to sea, replaced by something cleaner: paperwork, salt, and closure. When the official accounting came back, Rizzo called me first thing that morning. "You'd better sit down," he said. "I've been sitting for 6 months, Tom." He laughed softly through the receiver. "You're about to stand taller." The document was 8 pages long, stamped and notarized. In tidy columns, it showed what my children had really made of the cottage: $128,400 in gross bookings. After platform fees, they'd cleared $92,300, tax-free, all while claiming to honor Mum's memory. $18,000 gone to pay Evan's visa, $14,750 to Coastal Fixers LLC for a renovation signed by a woman who'd been dead a week, $9,600 in unpaid occupancy tax, $3,200 in HOA fines. It was arithmetic that even a tide couldn't wash clean. The judge's order followed 2 days later. Restitution, $38,000 to me immediately, the remainder under civil review. Penalties, payment of all outstanding taxes and HOA fees by Salton Cedar Stays LLC. Ownership, exclusive possession of the cottage awarded to me through probate. The email from Diaz came that same afternoon. Permit withdrawn, file closed. Just 5 words, but they sounded like the house itself exhaling. I drove down to Cape May the next morning. The sky was grey, the kind of grey my wife liked because it made the ocean look endless. When I reached the cottage, the porch was bare. No chalkboard, no sign, no guests, only gulls and quiet. Inside, I set the shoebox on the kitchen counter and opened every window. The smell of lemon cleaner was gone. In its place, cedar and salt. I stood there listening to the boards creak, remembering how she used to hum when she mopped. The house had always responded to her voice, never mine. But now, when the wind moved through the open doors, it sounded almost like a welcome. I took out the old bronze knob I'd kept wrapped in paper since June. The smart lock had been efficient, sure, but cold. I reinstalled the bronze one myself, oiled it until it turned with a sound like a polite cough. I turned it once, twice, testing the catch. It fit perfectly. It still knew my hand. Then I paid the debts they'd left. One check to the HOA, another to the town for the taxes. I stapled the receipts together and wrote "Quiet" on the manila folder before sliding it into the cabinet drawer. Justice didn't come in handcuffs or headlines, it came in balance sheets that finally added up. Around sunset, I made coffee in the chipped mug she used to claim tasted more honest than new ones. I sat on the porch with it, staring at the tide clock on the horizon. For the first time in months, the porch wasn't a stage. It was just wood under my feet. My phone buzzed, an email notification from Rizzo. The subject line, "Case closed." I didn't open it right away. I didn't need to. Some words don't have to be reread to be believed. Instead, I walked down the sand path to the edge of the dunes, where the seagrass bowed under the wind. The air smelled like rust and salt, and something that felt like peace. I knelt, ran my fingers through the sand and whispered, "It's done." If the waves heard me, they didn't answer, but I swear they slowed a little, as if even the Atlantic respected paperwork properly filed. That night, I left the Nest camera unplugged. On the mantel beside my wife's photo turned upright again, I didn't need surveillance anymore. I had something better, quiet proof, honest air. People think justice is loud, but it isn't. It's the sound of a lock turning easily in your hand. It's the paper in your drawer that says you were right all along. Justice didn't give me my wife back. It gave me her language again, the language of order, of earned peace. When I finally went to bed, the ocean outside was counting seconds against the bulkhead, steady as breathing. And for the first time since she died, I matched it. The house felt different in October. Not new, just honest. The kind of quiet that doesn't accuse you anymore. The court had said its piece. The papers were signed. The money had started trickling back. But what I noticed most wasn't the restitution, it was the rhythm. The cottage had gone back to breathing in time with the tide. I sat on the back steps that first Friday, the same ones my wife used to scrub with lemon water every spring, a mug of black coffee, her handwriting in my lap. I reread her letter for, maybe the 50th time. Don't let bitterness be the landlord of your heart. I thought I'd understand those words when I'd won. Turns out they only made sense after I stopped needing to. The porch boards clicked as they cooled in the evening air. My old notebook lay beside me, pages thick with notes and evidence. The ink faded but resolute. I flipped back through them. June 8th, chalkboard sign discovered. June 11th, Diaz confirms forgery. July 2nd, injunction filed. September 19th, hearing, case closed. Each line a bruise that had healed right on schedule. What I hadn't written anywhere was the sentence that mattered most. I forgive them. Not because they asked for it, they hadn't, but because the house had already done it for me. To say, I replaced the smart lock with the old bronze knob. Something changed. When I turned it, the sound was soft, forgiving. The same sound I remembered from the summers when we first bought this place, before cell phones, before resentment, before... Over time, shifts became our family tradition. In the weeks that followed the hearing, I found myself doing small repairs, recaulking the window panes, sanding the porch rail, fixing the screen door that had squeaked for 20 years. Every task felt like writing an apology, one nail at a time. Mrs. Carp came over one morning, a plate of oatmeal cookies in hand. "You're staying then?" she asked. "For now," I said. She smiled. "Good. The gulls have been too quiet without someone arguing with them." That made me laugh. The first honest laugh I'd had in months. I spent the rest of the week sorting through drawers, deciding what to keep and what to let go. I found a photo of the kids when they were small, sand stuck to their legs, both holding shells to their ears like telephones. They'd been so proud of this house once. Somewhere. Along the line, we'd all traded pride for profit. That's the thing about legacy. It's not what you leave behind. It's what survives you. My wife's handwriting, that blue ribbon in the attic, the cedar smell that outlasted her perfume. Those were her legacies. Not the money, not the property, just the discipline of care. On October 10th, I drove into a town for the flea market. A brass tide clock caught my eye, scratched but still ticking, $25. I brought it home, polished the rim, and hung it over the mantel where the Nest camera used to blink. It clicked every 45 minutes, announcing a new tide like a heartbeat that refused to retire. I sat beneath it that night, notebook open, writing letters to my children, one to each. No threats, no ultimatums, just facts and a closing line in plain ink. "Come down on October 12th. Bring notebooks. We'll learn the house together." I made a list of chores the way she used to. Oil the hinges, patch the roof seam, clean the stove ring. At the bottom I added a new one. Write an apology. File it with Rizzo. They might never come, but I wanted to leave the door open, not the one they broke, but the one that matters. When I finished writing, I looked around the cottage. The lights were low, the curtains breathing with the sea wind, the tide clock marking time I'd almost thrown away. I whispered into the stillness, "We're square now." Grief, I realized, isn't an ending. It's a kind of housekeeping. You sweep out what doesn't serve you, wipe the counters of blame, and keep the letters that still smell like salt and lavender. I closed her letter and put it back in the cedar box. Then I turned the tide clock 1 minute ahead. Just enough to give the house a head start on healing. They arrived on October 12th, exactly as I'd asked. No fanfare, no apologies in advance, Just the sound of gravel crunching under tired tires, and the kind of silence that only a family can carry. From the porch, I watched their car slow to a stop. Lena stepped out first, dressed down this time. No. Silk blouse, no sunglasses, just a sweatshirt and red eyes that looked like she'd been fighting sleep or regret. Evan followed, carrying a cardboard box filled with paperwork. For once, he didn't lead with words. I opened the screen door. It groaned, same as always. "You both remember how to fix that sound?" I asked. They didn't answer, but they smiled. Tight, hesitant smiles, the kind people wear when they're not sure if they're forgiven or just tolerated. We didn't start with speeches. We started with numbers. That was the only language we all still spoke. At the kitchen table, I laid out the HOA fine notice, the tax receipts, and a new ledger book. The air smelled of coffee and old wood polish. I spoke slowly, like a man explaining tide charts to children. "These," I said, pointing at the columns, "are debts that belong to the house, not to me, not to you. If we want to keep her legacy, we settle these line by line." They nodded, and for the first time in months, I believed the gesture. Lena unfolded the florist bill, $2,800, still crisp, still obscene. "That was my mistake," she whispered. "I thought the business needed a launch. I didn't think—" "No," I said softly. "You didn't." Her hands trembled as she pulled a checkbook from her purse. "I can pay some of it back. I've got savings." "Not all at once," I said. $200 a month auto transfer. Not for the money, for the discipline." She nodded again, tears smudging the ink as she signed. Evan cleared his throat and opened his box. Inside were contractor receipts and a bank statement showing the $18,000 visa refund already processed. "I talked to Rizzo," he said. "He told me about the interest penalties. I'll pay those too." I leaned back, watching him. "Do you know what hurt most, son? It wasn't the money. It was how easy you made it look. Turning something we built by hand into an ATM." He dropped his gaze. I thought I was fixing things. "Then fix this," I said, sliding the ledger toward him. "Start the next column." For an hour we worked. No shouting, no accusations, just pencils, figures, and the smell of old cedar. The math had turned from weapon to bridge. Around noon, I stood up and said, "Come outside. There's something you should both see." On the porch, I showed them the attic key with the blue ribbon. I climbed first. They followed. The attic was brighter than I remembered, sunlight sliding through cracks in the wood. I opened the cedar box and handed them their mother's letter. They read in silence. Her handwriting stopped them mid-breath, like a hymn. When they finished, Lena wiped her cheeks. "She really wrote this for us." "She wrote it for whoever forgot what peace costs," I said. We stood there for a long time, the three of us, breathing the same air she'd once dusted with lavender oil. It felt like church. Not the kind with pews, but the kind that reminds you how small you are next to forgiveness. Afterward, we went back downstairs. Evan found the broken screen door spring and began fixing it without being asked. Lena swept the porch, her movements slow but certain. By sunset, the place looked almost like it had 20 years ago, ordinary, honest, alive. When it got dark, they packed their things. On the way to the car, Lena turned. "Are we welcome back?" I looked at the cottage behind me, the old bronze knob catching moonlight like memory. "When you come to visit, not to profit," I said. "Then yes." They nodded, and for the first time I didn't see them as defendants or strangers. I saw my children again. After they drove off, I stayed on the porch. The tide clock ticked softly inside, steady as a heartbeat. The house wasn't revenge anymore. It was boundary, rebuilt. Justice had done its job. Now, peace would take over, I whispered to the wind. The same way I used to talk to her when she left early for the shore. It's all balanced now. Sometimes justice sounds like a judge, and sometimes it just sounds like a clean hinge. 2 weeks later, I heard the mailbox clang against the post, a sound that used to mean bills or bad news. This time it was a glossy envelope, heavy stock, embossed in gold. Premium coastal developers, cash offers above market. Inside was a letter that called me Dear Property Owner instead of by name. It promised to relieve me of maintenance, headaches, and offered a stress-free sale at $1.3 million. I laughed so hard I startled the gulls. After all those months of legal knots and quiet reckonings, some stranger thought peace was something I'd trade for cash. I folded the offer neatly, fed it to the wood stove, and watched the flame curl around the paper like a tongue savoring irony. The heat was brief, but honest. That night, I listed the cottage. Not for sale, but for winter volunteers. I wrote, "The ad myself on the community board at the Cape May post office. Small shore cottage open to writers, veterans, and anyone who needs quiet. Payment in soup or stories. Leave the gate as you found it." By November, 3 people had written back. A teacher from Trenton, a widower from Delaware, and a young man who said he'd lost his father last year and wanted to hear what silence sounds like. The porch started to fill again. But this time with laughter that didn't cost anything. We'd sit by the railing with chipped mugs, passing thermoses of coffee, and I'd tell them about the tides, about how my wife measured life by how high the water reached on the dock posts each season. Every Wednesday night, we held what they called the tide table, a small circle where each person shared something they were learning to let go of. I read my wife's letter aloud once, not as evidence but as scripture. The line about not letting bitterness be the landlord of your heart hit every person there like it was addressed to them. Maybe it was. On a grey November morning I heard a knock. When I opened the door, Mrs. Carp stood there with her pocket calendar, the same kitten cover she'd carried through everything. "I need you to sign today," she said, holding it out. "For what?" I asked. "So I remember who kept the quiet," she said. I smiled and signed my name. My handwriting tilted right, like my wife's. Funny thing, my signature had leaned left for years from hurry and habit. Somewhere between grief and justice, it had straightened out again. That evening, I walked down to the beach. The sky was pewter, the kind of sky that could only be painted by a season ready to rest. The ocean was calm, its pulse steady as if it too had settled its accounts. I stood barefoot where the surf met the sand, and I realized that every document, every receipt, every gavel strike had been just waves, loud, temporary. What remained was the shoreline, honest, enduring mine. Back at the cottage, I hung the blue ribbon inside the pantry door, where only I'd see it when reaching for coffee or sugar. It wasn't a trophy. It was a bookmark, a reminder that love and discipline share the same handwriting. Before bed, I looked around the living room, the bronze knob gleaming on the door, the tide clock ticking above the mantel, the shoebox of evidence tucked quietly under the stairs. I didn't burn it. I didn't need to. Some stories belong to the record, not to the flame. Outside, the wind shifted north, winter coming. I poured the last of my coffee and said the line that had followed me through this whole reckoning. "You didn't lose me. You tried to pawn me. I stayed because I'm not for sale." The stove hissed. The ocean murmured beyond the dunes, and for the first time in 26 years, the house didn't feel like it remembered me. It felt like it knew me again. Justice had turned into something quieter, humbler, stronger than revenge, a home that no longer needed witnesses, only caretakers. I turned off the lights, left the door unlocked, and let the tide keep time for us both.